Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, rumors heat up about the 2020 election. What are presidential candidates doing to woo local voters? Which prominent Utahns will make a bid for the governor's office? And as the battle for the future of the Utah Republican Party intensifies, what will be the impact of the infighting? Major political issues continue to dominate national headlines. How are Utah's lawmakers weighing in? Which issues are they prioritizing? And as the first 100 days of this Congress comes to a close, what mark has Utah's delegation made in D.C.? Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Morgan Lyon-Cotty, Associate Director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics, filling in for Jason Perry. Covering the week, we have Nicole Nixon, reporter with KUER, Rod Arquette, host of The Rod Arquette Show, and Matt Canham, Senior Managing Editor of the Salt Lake Tribune. Thank you all for joining us. It's always a very busy week in news and always a very busy week in politics. I'd like to start the conversation about what's going on with our own political parties in the state. Matt, I know you've covered this for many years. Right. There's been a lot of discussion over the last month about what's happening with the chair position in Utah's Republican Party, but now there's a lot of discussion about the state central committee. Tell us why those roles are so important and why there's controversy about this upcoming election.
There's been such infighting, and it's been dragging on for years, and it's kind of reached this focal point of what happens with the next chair. So our current Republican Party chair is not going to run again, Rob Anderson. He has not had a fun couple of years here. This Central Committee is part of the reason it's not gone particularly well. There's a core group of them who are so upset about how we pick our candidates to be in the primary election that they have just thrown a monkey wrench into every decision that is made. I gotta say, you look at both the Republicans and the Democrats in this state, leading a political party does not look like a fun job.
No, this isn't a fun job, and it's going to be interesting to watch. There, as Matt said, you know, the court challenges are done, okay? SB 54, it is the law right now, and the court challenges are over. So where do you go from here? I think the parties are trying to figure that out, and these elections for the State Central Committee, you've got groups like in Davis County, there's a group of about 13 who are calling them Building the Bridges, kind of Democratic group, some of whom want to be on that Central Committee and bring unity to the party. So it's really going to be interesting to see what the next phase of this is out. The hissy fit is over. Now where do you go from here?
And there was a time where it seemed like the Central Committee was more in line with elected officials, both in the legislative branch and in the executive branch. It seems like there is a play to try to get that more in line. Nicole, we're seeing big names like Greg Hughes and other legislators, current legislators, Rep. Spenlove, who are trying to get on that Central Committee. What do you see in the future over these next couple of years? Can they get more in line with one another?
I think their big struggle is with all of this infighting that especially the Republican Party has had, their party has suffered, and you saw that when Democrats picked up a few seats in the legislature. They were spending so much time fighting about SB 54 and the primary ballot issue that they were not spending as much time getting their own candidates elected, which is the job of a Republican or of a political party, is to get your candidates elected. So I think that by bigger names kind of showing interest in being on the Central Committee. The other issue is that people haven't been as involved in the really grassroots politics, which is the caucus system. I think caucus attendance is down, and that's another reason why Republicans have been suffering a little bit. So by these bigger names getting involved, maybe they're drawing attention to it. That's their strategy, is to let people know, hey, we're still here and we have work to do, and you can get involved too.
You know, the real challenge, I think, is going to be the chairmanship. And if that chairman can be an individual who can unite the party, because I think, Matt, that's the biggest challenge.
And that's what Anderson came in to do.
Yeah.
Now, let's just break it down to its base level and say a little bit about what the fight is over. We've had our caucus and convention system where you go to your neighborhood meeting, you get elected to the convention, you are among the group that gets to pick the candidate if that candidate can get enough support at a convention. You had a lot of power in that position. And now we've made it so you can also just collect signatures and get on the ballot. And we've seen a lot of big name politicians in our state go both routes, just secure a spot on that primary election. It means those caucuses don't mean as much. It means the convention doesn't mean as much. And it means those insiders who used to have a lot of influence now see their influence waning, and they are fighting for control. And so this thing has overwhelmed the Republican Party at a time where they're losing grasp of power in Salt Lake County, where they lost a congressional seat, and where the normal party apparatus, where they would get volunteers and help with research and fundraising, is all sucked into this fight amongst themselves. And at some point, people who are bigger names in the Utah Republican Party are hoping this thing ends.
Yeah.
And it hasn't yet.
Yeah,
But
it hasn't ended yet.
That will be their issue with county conventions and the organizing convention this spring is, which direction do we want to go now? Are we still going to focus on somehow trying to fix the caucus system or strengthen the caucus system, even though this lawsuit has gone all the way to the Supreme Court and they didn't want to hear it? Or do we focus on regrouping, getting our own people elected, and strengthening our caucus system where we can under where it is now?
So you're all discussing how they're trying to find more alignment. What's that alternative, though? What if they aren't able to? What is the future of the Republican Party if this battle just continues to wage?
We saw it in Nevada, where I think, if I remember right, the Republican Party apparatus there collapsed, and they just kind of started over. You know, the interesting part, in such a conservative state, you don't need a strong Republican Party to have a Republican governor. You don't need a strong Republican Party to have Republican senators. So it becomes a fight among, they're still key positions, they're just not the statewide ones, where there is some influence there. You could start over if this thing can't get fixed. We've seen that in other states. I don't think we're at that stage yet. And this, obviously, the Central Committee fight is people who are in more prominent positions trying to wrestle control and change the direction of the party. It may be successful, it may not be. But if you're the governor or you're the senators, you don't want to see this infighting going on. When you're entering a presidential year, you're entering a year where there is a lot at stake.
Yeah, and the broader question, I think, not only here in Utah, but you're seeing it around the country, the broader question has to be, what is the future of political parties to begin with? Social media, millennials have changed so much. What's the future of any political party going to be down the road?
Right.
And its influence?
Well, we're seeing a battle not just between elected officials and the Central Committee, but also the legislative branch and the governor's office. One of the governor's vetoes this year was over a bill that would have changed the way we do special elections. Rod, I wonder if you can provide some analysis on this. Vetoes are so rare, but now we're hearing about something even more rare, a possible veto override.
Yeah, well, this goes back to, I believe it's the Jason Chaffetz situation, when Chaffetz announced, of course, he was leaving Congress, and there was a debate between the governor and the lawmakers as to who set this all up. And I think that's what it comes back to. And I think they're looking at the possibility this may happen again. There could be a possibility that Chris Stewart is named Secretary of the Air Force. Well, that creates the situation again. So who determines the rules for selecting a replacement for here? So it's really a battle between the governor and, I think, legislative leaders. And I know Nicole's been covering this as well. Yeah,
they did. I mean, they had they had a veto override session last year, too, about this special election, that fight. So they are rare, but this is just continuing sort of that tug of war between lawmakers and the governor over this issue.
I think it's healthy, actually. This is where our government works. There is checks and balances, and they are using the tools to try to refine a system. They just have different ideas. And this also goes back to the SB 54 situation. What that bill did, it made it so you weren't allowed to collect signatures to be in a special election to replace someone who leaves in the middle of a term. The governor made it, so the governor vetoed it, so that is still an option as of now. We'll see what happens with that veto override.
And I remember former Speaker Hughes was saying, I think if you read between the lines what he was saying, he wants to make sure the legislature remains relevant in everything that involves the state business, and not all the power residing in just the governor's office, but the legislature is also relevant. And that's why he was pushing for this so hard.
Right. We had other news about our major political parties this week. Matt, your paper reported on this. The Democrats announced that they will no longer be paying their chairwoman. It seems like it's less about party politics, more about fiscal issues. Tell us a little bit more about it.
So the Democratic Party has been struggling to raise enough money to cover its own expenses, and a big part of their expenses, they have 3 employees on their payroll, including their chairwoman, Daisy Thomas. Daisy was a Bernie delegate who, kind of led this takeover of the Utah Democratic Party. And so there's a lot of younger people involved. There's a lot of more progressive people involved. But just like the infighting in the Republican Party, there's been infighting in the Democratic Party. It hasn't been as much about the issues as it is party governance. There was a former vice chairman who was alleged to have been involved in some sexual misconduct with some other people in the party. And there's a fight within the party of whether they dealt with that situation correctly, whether they have the procedures to handle any more accusations against anyone in the future. And now that vice chairman may try to run for party chairman again, and it's causing all kinds of consternation. You set that aside, then there's financial problems, and the executive director didn't get a full paycheck. And in a party that is what they call themselves a workers' party, a party that has a lot of labor unions who back them, not paying for work is not okay in the Democratic Party. And they had a sharp reaction, and the executive committee's decision was, if we're going to stop paying someone, we're going to stop paying the chair.
Yeah.
How surprising was this? After so much excitement over the Democratic races, Utah picked up a seat. The Democrats picked up a seat in 2018, and there seems to be a lot of excitement as well over the Salt Lake City mayor's race. Nicole, was this surprising at all to you?
I think it was surprising, and it also wasn't surprising going back to, you mentioned this sort of struggle within the party. It hasn't been reported on a lot, but it's been there, and there has been a lot of disagreement. I think the finance issue might also relate to the fact that people, I'm not sure, are giving as much to political parties anymore, as much as they're giving directly to candidates that they want to support.
To Rod's point earlier about some of the dysfunction within the parties, Going from very, very local Democratic politics to very, very national, we're getting, I believe, our 3rd visit from a Democratic presidential candidate. Senator Elizabeth Warren is coming to Salt Lake next week. Rod, I'm so curious to hear your thoughts on this.
How
does her message,
how does her huge crowds.
Bernie brought big crowds in 2016.
Bernie brought big crowds. It's been interesting, I was talking the other day about the fight, the struggle that many of these women candidates on the Democratic side for the White House are having in getting the attention. I mean, if you look at the polls right now, you've got Biden, you've got Bernie, you've got Beto, you've got the mayor from South Bend, all creeping up in the polls, and the only woman candidate so far who's making any type of inroad is Kamala Harris. So when are these other candidates going to start emerging? I think it's still very, very early in the race. And Elizabeth Warren, I mean, if you look at some of them, they kind of stumbled out of the gate with certain things. Amy Klobuchar, she's not nice to work with. Elizabeth Warren and the whole DNA thing. So can they recover? I think all these candidates, there's such a big field, and all of them were looking for that moment. So Elizabeth Warren, I think this is just part of the process that you have to go through, visit as many states as you can, and let people get to know you. She's been here before, I believe, in the past. It'll be interesting to see what kind of attention she gets here. Bernie can draw crowds. There's no doubt about it. He knows how to do that. But can he win? That's going to be the question.
I think we're going to have a lot of Democratic candidates come to the state, and I think people shouldn't be surprised by that. It's a conservative state when it gets to the general election, but every state matters in the primary. Every state can help a candidate gain that momentum that you talked about. Did you pick up those delegates? Did you win a state? That matters. In this last legislative session, we changed how we're going to do our presidential primary. We now actually have a primary. It's Super Tuesday. That's a key moment in this presidential race. So these presidential candidates, I think some people in the state might be surprised. I bet we're going to see almost all of them. And you see someone like Elizabeth Warren, who is a very strong progressive, who has some support among people who liked Bernie last time. I think getting here early, building some people who are enthusiastic about her campaign is not a bad way to go. I think she could be a candidate here.
There's a long way to go, and Matt's right. You've got to start, and you've just got to you've got to work the delegates as much as you can and the voters.
Beyond the primary in 2016. The Hinckley Institute and the Tribune did quite a bit of polling, and that summer polling was very interesting. Hillary Clinton was pretty close to Donald Trump. Do you see Utahns identifying with any of these Democratic candidates? We all know that a lot of that was that Donald Trump was not popular here in Utah, still not very popular for a Republican president. But do you see Utahns really getting behind any of these Democratic candidates, Nicole?
I think we'll have to wait and see who emerges as frontrunners in the primary next year. I think it will be interesting to watch Donald Trump next year because he obviously wasn't very popular in Utah. He got 46%, and there was the third party, Evan McMullin, too. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Trump get more support in 2020 than he got in 2016, but it's early still.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, if I had to make a prediction today, I would guess that Donald Trump would be in about mid 50%. Very, very, very low for a Republican candidate in Utah. But this is assuming there's not another third-party candidate, and it's assuming that there isn't a Democrat who catches fire. I know we have 20 candidates or something like that.
On the Democratic side,
I know a little bit about each of them. I don't see some spark that makes me think that any of them in this progressive move of the Democratic Party are going to be the type of candidates who convinces Utah Republicans to give them a shot. But as we said, it's early.
Yeah, it's early.
Very early. Also early days for our gubernatorial election. Right. But there's a name that keeps on coming up in the news this past week or so, Jon Huntsman Jr. Why is his name, Matt, why is his name being bandied about? What is the likelihood that he could come back?
So first I'll disclose that the Salt Lake Tribune is owned by Jon Huntsman Jr.'s brother, Paul. So I should put that out there. Jon Huntsman was a very popular governor, but he also has spent a lot of time as an ambassador. And if you look at his career, he spends about 2 years in each post, which is not unusual when it comes to ambassadors from our country. So it's not like he's outside the norm in that. Well, he's coming up on 2 years in Russia. So it raises the question of, does he stick through for the next 2 years of Trump's term? Does he start looking for another opportunity? And what would that opportunity be? We have heard from more than 6 well-placed sources that they've either talked directly to the ambassador or seen communications from the ambassador that he is at least open to running for governor again. There's a couple things that signals. One, he's getting close to being done in Russia. 2, it's not a guarantee he's looking for another job in the administration. And so if you're going to come back to Utah and you want to still be relevant politically, there's not that many seats open. You either go for governor in 2020, you try to nudge Mike Lee aside for Senate in 2022, and they are close with each other. So I don't see.
Mike Lee worked in his administration.
Right. So I don't see that as something that he would do unless Mike Lee was deciding he didn't want to run again. Or what? You go to business, you go to a think tank. If you're Jon Huntsman and you're looking for your next move, there are lots of options, but there are few as enticing as governor.
Yeah. And I wonder if he's looking at way down the road. I wonder if he's looking at get back here, because I think he's kind of lost a little bit over there in Russia, to be real honest. It's a difficult position with Putin and with Trump and everything else. I think he's a little lost over there. Does he come back here and run, thinking ahead to maybe 2024 and a more national presidential run a second time?
Very interesting.
Be interesting to watch.
Yeah. We often hear about the first 100 days in office for a president, but Nicole, you recently noticed we're about 100 days into this Congress and have been doing some reporting and some research on that. Let's start with Senator Romney. What are you finding about his first 100 days in office?
Well, I think he's tried to keep about as low a profile as he can. Every time he comments on anything, he gets attention for it, which I think is to be expected as a former presidential nominee. But he's settling into his committees. He's co-sponsoring legislation. He hasn't introduced his own signature piece of legislation yet, but he has. He has clashed with Trump and broken with other Republicans a few times, namely on those symbolic resolutions about the war in Yemen and Trump's foreign policy, and the when Trump declared a national emergency at the border. There was also the time when Trump was tweeting about the late Senator John McCain, disparaging him, and Romney took to Twitter to sort of discourage that and wonder why the president kept going after this statesman that he so admires even after his death. So I think Romney has proven like what people expected of him, which is that he does have sort of an elevated stature as a freshman senator. He's doing his thing, but he's not making a ton of headlines, and he's not really wanting to do that.
Yeah, I think he's about right where he wanted to be at this time. I mean, he said during the campaign he will criticize the president when he feels he should, and that he will support him when he feels he should as well. And I think he's walked that line pretty well, to be real honest. He was critical the other day, concerned about the changes taking place with the Department of Homeland Security, and expressed concern there, while on the other side he agreed with the president on some of the things he's trying to do on immigration. So it's about what Romney said he would do at this point, I think.
Yeah, Matt, do you feel like those comments are in line with Utah voters as well? I know there was some news this week about the comments about the U.S. being an asylum magnet. Do you think those are in line?
Yeah, so he that's what his terminology was in reaction to Donald Trump saying our country is full, which, if you've driven in the American West, is clearly not the case. I think, but Mitt Romney is pretty close to the president when it comes to immigration policy. So I think he tries to weave it back towards something that might be more normal political discourse, which I think happened in that case. You know, when you think about what it takes to be a successful senator, he's only been there for a few months. It's a 6-year term, not the 2-year term of the House where you're constantly running. It's all about relationships. And all of those 99 senators know who Mitt Romney is. But that doesn't mean he knows who all of they are, who they are. And so I'm sure he is spending a significant amount of time building relationships, which might be why there's a little bit of a slow start when it comes to policy. He might be doing more co-sponsoring than not. It's that he's building that platform in which he can have the influence that he clearly wants to have in the United States Senate. It's about those one-on-one interactions with your colleagues.
What about the first 100 days for our newest member of Congress, for Congressman McAdams? Rods, what has been your take about how?
You know, I think this balanced budget amendment that he proposed the other day is fascinating to see. I mean, usually that is a conservative Republican approach, and here you have a Democrat coming in, and he got, I believe it was 27 other lawmakers to sign on to this, which is pretty amazing. So is he signaling the rebirth of the Blue Dog Democrats? Yeah. I mean,
of which he's a member.
Which he is a member. And if they stay together as a force, that gives Nancy Pelosi all kinds of headaches, because she's got the progressive wing, now she's got the Blue Dog Democrats, and you know, Nancy Pelosi's got to balance it. So that was a surprising move on his part, and we'll see how he shakes out so far.
I think Ben McAdams knows his district very well, and this is a good example of that. He had a very close race. He should expect a very close race in 2020 if he runs again. He knows his district is conservative, and they will appreciate this.
Yeah. We saw that the governor signed some legislation that came out of the legislature that's already being challenged. This abortion bill, now law, bans abortions after 18 weeks. And Planned Parenthood and ACLU have already come out with a lawsuit. Nicole, I know you followed this closely. Can you provide some additional context and some analysis about what's going on?
Yeah, so first of all, this lawsuit wasn't a surprise. We have known it's been coming since the legislative session when they passed the bill. But all over the country, you are seeing restrictive abortion laws coming up in state houses since the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court over the past 2 years. So this is one in many abortion restrictive bills that have come up, and not even the most restrictive. In other states, you have fetal heartbeat bills, 15-week abortion bans. This one would ban abortions after 18 weeks. So they filed this lawsuit trying to block the law from taking effect next month. No one who supports the bill, Governor Gary Herbert, its sponsor, Representative Cheryl Acton, was really surprised about the lawsuit, but they see it as maybe a vehicle to take it all the way to the Supreme Court. as these other bills in other states.
Yeah, Rod, what's the likelihood of that?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting to watch because, like Nicole just said, you now had a third governor just this week sign on to the fetal heartbeat bill. So you've got 3 states with that bill. You've got the 18-week bills. You've got the 15-week bills. And as I spoke with Representative Acton the other day, I said, is the effort on the part of pro-life groups to chip away as much as you can on the abortion issues with the hopes that someday the Supreme Court will say, okay, we're going to take a look at this again. It's been 40, 45 years now since Roe v. Wade, and I think the plan is let's constantly present bills, and maybe one of them, the Supreme Court will say, all right, let's take a look at this.
Yeah. And Matt, we did see people try to make that argument, the argument about fiscal conservatism. Right. We're a small state. Why should we carry the load by trying to take this lawsuit? Why didn't that argument work? Why is Utah still pursuing this?
I think it's because there's a chance the Supreme Court will take it up. The fiscal conservative argument works when you already have an established idea of where the Supreme Court is. If you think the likelihood of your bill being upheld is very low, then the money you spend is wasted. But now we don't know what our Supreme Court would do. And I think if you are a person who really believes that abortion rights should be restricted, and this is really something you've held close, the fact that you could be part of that change is incredibly enticing. And so there's going to be a lot of states that say it's worth the money. It's worth the money because I care about this issue. I care about unborn children, and what's a few $1 million when we're talking about saving lives? If that's something you hold personally, that's something you hold dear, the money's kind of an irrelevant argument.
Yeah. Rod, you get the last word. Anything else?
It's just going to be interesting to watch how this all plays out. You've got to change Supreme Court. Are we going to see another change down the road? And I think, like Matt said, people are seeing we may have a possibility here to do something about abortion.
All right. Thank you, all 3 of you, for this wonderful conversation. The conversation continues online. Please go to kued.org/Hinckley Report for more discussion of this week's politics. I'm Morgan Lyon-Cotti. Thanks and good night.